Music History, brought to you by...
It was the first week of the first semester of my freshman year. I was enrolled in a world civilization class that was required in the core curriculum. As with most college courses, that first week the instructor gave a talk on what the class would be like and the material he would cover. While I made nothing of it at the time, one of the topics he opened for class discussion during that first week was a debate on the question of predestination versus free will in human affairs. As I recall, the class was basically evenly split on the question, with religious beliefs figuring prominently in people's opinions. I absolutely remember how I felt on the question. At that time, I was almost certain that each individual controlled his or her own destiny and that there was no master plan laid out from the moment of conception that dictated every single action or event in a person's life. By that standard, individuals throughout time that had been viewed at either extreme of the spectrum of good and evil, and the vast majority of people that will fall somewhere in the middle, would have had nothing to do with how their lives turn out. It would mean that ultimately nobody was responsible for his or her own actions. It would mean that the homicidal axe murderer ultimately had no say in the matter, or that the most pious, self-sacrificing clergyman would have had it decided for him long before he realized which way his life was heading. Again, I thought nothing of this predestination versus free will debate at the time. It would be 10 years after the fact before I realized that discussion was probably a key marker in foretelling the strange events that will follow. Another similar and probably more foretelling experience took place 2 years later. I was leaving a class in the building that housed the psychology department when a student I'd never met before came up to me and asked if I would participate in an experiment she was working on for one of her psychology classes. Since I didn't have another class or commitment right away that would prevent it, I happily agreed. In the experiment, the student administering the test used a small tabletop device with 3 colored light bulbs. With his back turned away from the administrator and the device, the subject, which was me in this case, was asked to correctly identify which colored light bulb the tester had turned on. The purpose of the experiment, she explained, was to measure the mind's ability to perceive things not detected through normal senses. Sort of an intuition workout. As it turned out, I performed poorly in correctly identifying which of the bulbs she was turning on during the experiment. Although I'd never met her before, I don't think it was coincidental that she asked me to participate in her study. Maybe she was facing a deadline and would have taken anyone. I don't know. But given the things that started to happen to me just a few months later, I think her selecting me was a foreshadowing marker of things to come. If you're wondering how a person knows when he is the victim of a paranormal arrest, I'll tell you that it happens very gradually. For me, it was February of 1993 when it became gradually apparent that something was very wrong. By then, I was in my 4th year of college and had accumulated enough credit for a senior classification. I was an average student and attended classes on a regular basis. Up until that point, I thought I was having a pretty normal college experience. That sense of normalcy was instantly shattered when one day I noticed that my instructors and other students began making comments that clearly indicated they had some type of access to my private life off campus. These comments reflected things that happened in my life in the previous hours or days. Their comments reflected insight into my eating, sleeping, bathing, studying, and driving patterns. Also reflected were detailed knowledge of my telephone conversations and, worst of all, my intimate sexual activities. Now, never was anyone bold enough to say anything specific about people, places, or things. Nothing like, I saw you doing blank last night, or I know you talked with Mr. X last night. But their preferred method of attack was to say, while giggling and cackling, that something had happened to them or someone they knew that was just coincidentally identical to events in my own life in the previous hours or days. For example, say I had a really bad case of diarrhea that kept me up all night long. The next day, I could count on someone telling a similar story about themselves or a friend with diarrhea. These comments were usually not made directly to me, but typically within earshot, leaving little doubt that they were aimed at me. Initially, I thought they had to be gathering this information through some type of conventional electronic surveillance